pretty common to hear the phrase when people are talking about the condition of society and indeed the country today, that this country is going to the dogs. It's something I hear a fair bit, and everyone has their own different reasons for why they think we are going severely off course and off track. You can take your pick from any one of the news stories in the last couple of weeks. There was the supposed misleading of the Chancellor, telling us that things are much worse than they were, but losing a lot of public trust in terms of the public purse. And then, of course, the real fun bit of that was that all our taxes went up as a result. But growth isn't going up, and you've got a really stagnating economic picture. And then even just today we had the announcement that there's a landmark programme for youth, because there are now record numbers of youth unemployment, to try and get them into some education and training. And whatever your sector is, whether it might be the social sector or health or education, which all of these are facing struggles and a difficulty to cope with the unique set of circumstances that our society is bringing up right now. And that can lead to a kind of fatigue and a malaise, and for all of us to go, you know what, this is going completely off course. And sometimes that buys into a myth that it was ever going particularly perfectly, but as human beings we tend to think, well, it probably was better than this. And it's the appearance of everything going to the dogs that's happening in Isaiah chapters 7 through to 11. Now, we've got this wonderful passage, Isaiah chapter 11, which talks about a future leader coming who'll be a wonderful counsellor and who will have these incredible attributes and qualities. And I was thinking about it this week, and it's often hard, with Christmas and Easter. It's hard. We've got the same passages we have every year, and you've probably had them done to death. So I thought what would be helpful will be trying to dig into the actual political and real life situation into which these words were spoken in the prophet Isaiah. Now, Isaiah is prophesying sometime around 700 years before the coming of Jesus. And by this time, they already have quite a lot of scriptures and tradition that's given them an expectation that they, as Old Testament Judah, or the people of God, that God was going to be with them, and that he was going to create a great nation and kingdom from them. But none of that looks like it's going to be fulfilled in Isaiah's time. The kingdom which they had has now been split into two. So a bit like North and South Korea, or North and South Vietnam, or anything. There's rival political kingdoms that get split into two. You've got Israel in the north and Judah as a kind of smaller outpost to the south. And so even the people that originally God had made all these promises to can't agree amongst themselves in quite a serious way. But more than that, Judah, who Isaiah is prophesying to, their kingdom, they've got a king on the throne called Ahaz, and whatever you think of Keir Starmer, they probably thought he was worse than that. Because he's not popular, because he's seen as presiding over a national slide for their nation. He's seen as being a weak political leader, and he's really helping accelerate their demise. They're losing their sense of connection to God, the scriptures, all of that kind of thing. They're actually losing any sense of hope and belief that God is going to continue to make them into a great nation, or even that God is going to be with them. And actually, a lot of this we get from Isaiah chapter 7, which is where this little book kind of starts, because Ahaz is threatened by a huge empire that's on the rise called Assyria. So Assyria would be, if you think of America in the 1900s, it's in the ascendancy, nobody can stand in their way. That's Assyria at this time. And they're amassing more political and military might, and they look seriously threatening, because they are wanting to take out everything in the vicinity, and as empires do, to subsume them into their empire. And so they're trying to think, how are we going to respond to this? And Isaiah challenges Ahaz, look to God for this. Look to God for a sign that he's going to be with you. Put your trust in him. And Ahaz decides, actually, no, because Assyria is way too mighty, way too powerful. And he says to him, ask the Lord your God for a sign in chapter 7, verse 10, whether the deepest depths or the highest heights. But Ahaz said, I will not ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. Now, that's really important because it sounds like, oh, well, I'm being very pious and virtuous, but he's actually consumed by false humility, and it's masking his fearfulness. He doesn't think God is going to come through for him, and so he takes the nation off course. Now, spoiler alert, Judah ends up being completely ransacked in the year 580 BC, and so this is the beginning of the slow decline. But we have a bunch of hope tucked away in the middle of that. So even while Ahaz is not a good leader, and things aren't going well for them, God is still giving promises of peace through the prophet Isaiah. And the prophet Isaiah was speaking into Ahaz and into this political situation, but this is really cool. Whenever you're reading any of the Old Testament prophets, something good to remember is that, when you look at a mountain range, it's not easy for you to distinguish which ones are about, say 20 miles in front of you and which are maybe 200 miles. If it's all far enough away, they all kind of blend into the one picture. That's the way the prophets saw stuff in the Old Testament. They saw things that were going to happen maybe in 80, 100 years, and they saw things that were going to happen in 700 years. Because some of this is almost certainly talking about the birth and the arrival of Christ and what that's going to look like. So I want to look at what it says about peace in chapter 11. Peace through the darkness, peace worth having, and peace for all people. Peace through the darkness. A shoot will come up, verse 1, from the stump of Jesse, from its roots a branch. It'll bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, of counsel and might, and the Spirit and the fear of the Lord. Now, they've just had this conversation where Ahaz is fretting about the people that are going to come and ransack them. We read in chapter 7 that the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. So I'm going to borrow from that a wee bit, because into that's where Isaiah says a shoot's going to come up, and the Spirit of the Lord will rest on this leader, and he'll have wisdom and understanding, and he'll know what to do. The people and the king are shaken to their core, because they think this big empire is going to come and it's going to absolutely finish us off, and there's going to be nothing left of any of us and our families. And you can see the kind of picture, the mental condition of the people through that chapter, because they're shaken and they've lost all hope and belief in God. And it's into that, and this is often the way prophecy and the way the gospel works, it speaks into what looks to be a hopeless situation. Looks like they can feel the clouds closing in, and it's utter darkness and hopelessness. And into that, Isaiah says, no, actually, a ruler is going to come, and the Spirit of God is going to be in him, and it's going to come out of the stump. Now, if you see a tree stump, you think, okay, there was a tree once there is no longer a tree there. That's the end of that tree. And he's using this poetic imagery to get them to see, actually, a shoot's going to come out of that dead tree. And specifically, David's line, because if you go even farther back in the Hebrew Bible, David was promised by God that he was one of the great kings of Israel, that a ruler from his generations, from his descendants, would always sit on the throne, and indeed would be the one who brings God's kingdom to the world. So he's saying, from the stump of Jesse, that's David's father, a shoot is going to come out. That promise is still alive, however hopeless it looks. It looks like it's dead, but it's not. I'm not a gardener, but we planted some hydrangeas a few years, and I remember the first winter that we had, when all the leaves go and they wither completely. I remember saying to Victoria, that's dead, that's not coming back next year, because I didn't know how they worked. But it looked to me, by all appearances, like it was gone. I thought, I can't see, it doesn't seem logical to me how that's going to come back. Anyway, it came back next summer, and it flowered, and people who know more about these things than me will think, yes, of course. But an even greater miracle is being talked about here. Someone is going to come from David's future generations, and as dead and as hopeless as things look like now, it's going to be the one that God promised, who God's Spirit will rest on, and he'll bring this peace. And that is meant to give, for anybody who's listening at that time, a bit of hope and peace, that, you know what, at the very least, God hasn't abandoned us. Those promises that he made through scripture hundreds of years ago, he has not given up on them, and he's still working. Even in the supposed darkness and solitude and deadness of a stump that's being cut off, because spiritually they're at a low ebb. They've been cut down. It looks like in military and political terms they're about to be cut down, and yet a shoot will come up from that stump of Jesse. From its roots a branch will bear fruit. There are fruitful days coming. Now perhaps you need the hope of some of that peace today, because we can all know what it is to walk through times of grief, of doubt, uncertainty and questioning. And through that we can ask, God, I have believed in God's promises and his goodness for me, but that seems a long way off just now. And I'm going through a bit of darkness, and I actually feel a bit like that tree stump that I've been cut down, or maybe even cut off. And if that's you, can I encourage you this morning that though you may feel that way, and though that may actually be some of your reality, that you have that something that's come and leveled you to a degree, that doesn't mean that God isn't still with you and working in and through you underneath the surface. And whatever he's doing in and through you at this time, it awaits a growth, a fruitfulness, and that might not be just now or next month or next year. But he is doing it because that's the nature of how he works. And the whole paradox of the gospel is often that God is at work when everything else looks dark and hopeless. We shared a challenging message for us about our finances as a church last week. But the only response for a people who are called by God and who believe in a God who works through darkness and apparent difficulty and hopelessness is to hang on to the gospel. That through whatever difficulty we endure, that God is doing something through it, and we have no idea what's going to be birthed and grow through that. This is a peace that endures and carries us through the darkness and actually promises us light at the end of that darkness. And then it is a peace that is worth having. Now, when we get these amazing prophecies about this future ruler and leader, who we in the church rightly ascribe them to Jesus, there's so many things that we can focus on. I mean, Jesus is the completeness and the perfection of everything you and I would hope humanity would be. He's sinless in his perfection. He has kindness and compassion for the most marginalized of folks. He cannot be drawn into senseless conflict. He gives people a measure of forgiveness and love that they desperately need. He stands up to those who are oppressors and who are trying to draw people into games and who are using other people for their advantage. And Jesus fulfills all our aspirations for that. But here's one that I'd not really looked at much before. The spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord will be on him. So he'll have this perfect wisdom from God, which he'll go about his life with. He will not judge, in verse 3, by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. Do you know, in that prophecy is one of our deepest longings, because some of the things that I started with the sermon with, the tax rises on people who are just being asked to carry more of the burden, and the fact that perhaps our schools and our hospital waiting lists, that these things don't seem to be being administered properly. All of our longings come to, we want to be ruled with a sense of justice and even a sense of making it make sense. We want to feel like whoever's making decisions, that they're actually doing things properly, that they're actually looking at where the needs are and apportioning that properly. And it's saying the ruler that'll come from David's family, he's going to be like that. He is going to, because you and I, spoiler alert, we're humans and we're flawed. And as long as you and I are involved in creating world systems or governing affairs, we're going to have blind spots and we're going to make mistakes, or we're going to judge by what our eyes see, and we're going to try and make peace based on that. The classic one, and we get some of this with the kids in school, and I'm sure you've seen it too, is that there's someone who's an instigator in a class, and they're bad news and they're trouble, and they're winding everyone else up, and then finally they wind one of the good kids up enough where the good kid snaps and they decide to lash out back. Good kid is going to see the head teacher and getting a phone call to their parents, and the parents are like, what the heck? This has been going on for months. And you're nodding because you know exactly that this is the way it is a lot of the time. And it's unfortunate, but it's because we have humans who are flawed at every point in all of our systems. And Jesus isn't like that. And Jesus doesn't judge like that. And he actually comes to give a peace that isn't just based on what we see in the normal kind of ways that we make judgments and decisions in this world. The likes of Ukraine just now, in their conflict, they are being leaned on to take a peace at any cost, to take a peace at losing half their sovereignty as a nation. And they know it's not worth having, because they can see that sometimes peace isn't all it's cracked up to be. Sometimes peace is based on a lot of compromise and even falsehood, and it's not worth having. Jesus, spoken about in this passage, is the only one who can give us a peace that is genuinely from God and which isn't like all the others. Now, Ahaz in the Old Testament, he's trying to get a political peace, a bit like the one Ukraine is being forced to take. He actually gets the offer of the powerful empire of Syria to come in and be one of their vassal kind of states, and, all the threat of fight will go away. Job done. But it's not what God's calling him to, and it's not what God called his people to, because God always calls us to judge by something different, to trust in something where the appearances aren't all that they're cracked up to be. And that's actually what we celebrate at Advent and Christmas time as well. Jesus is this figure and can fulfill this prophecy, because that's exactly at Advent how we celebrate he comes into the world. Jesus doesn't come into the world in Advent through an appearance that looks anything like what we would expect kingship or the saviour of the world to be like. It's into poverty. It's into squalor by all appearances. It's into absolutely no fanfare. It's the kind of thing that, if it weren't for the fact that it dramatically changed people's lives and in the course of history, we wouldn't know anything about Jesus, because the way it happens, it would probably never have been written down or anyone would have bothered with it. But because Jesus then went on to back up the things that were said about him and even what he said about himself with dramatic power, with people's lives being changed, with part of the world being changed, and then this message spreading out all over the known world. Because of that, we know about it. But if you were to have taken the stable scene, which we'll be seeing at the Nativity in a few weeks' time, if you were to have looked at that as an objective outsider, you would not have said that the appearance of that was that the Saviour of the world was being born that night. But it doesn't matter, because the way things appear is often not where the truth really lies or is buried. And that seems to be the way God likes to work, is to bury his truth in things that perhaps don't look particularly impressive, even in people. And the Apostle Paul says the people that come to make up the church, not many of them are impressive by worldly standards, but they have the hope of life and the gospel at work within them, and that's what makes the difference. Appearances and even what we hear, marketing, all of that can be so deceptive, and it can actually hide what's underneath. But Jesus is the only person who's ever been on this world who has been, that phrase, what you see is what you get. That is Jesus, because he's not trying to flatter or deceive with any of his appearances, and that's the basis on which he invites us to trust in him and for him to give us that peace in our hearts, which is actually the only peace in the world that's truly worth having. Every other peace is flawed humans involved at every other stage. But that peace from within, knowing that we belong to God and belong to Jesus, that's worth having. And it's based on the real deal, and it might not always make total rational sense. Faith doesn't always. But we know in our own spirit that even despite whatever things look like on the inside, we have that peace from God. That's the most precious one and truly worth having. And lastly, a peace for all people. There's this beautiful kind of poetic bit about the wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard with the young goat, and so perfect harmony. And then in verse 10 we read that in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for all the peoples, and the nations will rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. I love just thinking about the fact that Isaiah is writing about this future ruler, this agent of God who's going to bring goodness to so many people, and he doesn't see exactly when or where it's going to happen or all the details, or the fact that he'll come and then 2,000 years later you and I will be sitting here still enjoying the benefits of it, although we're waiting for him to come again. But it is so indiscriminate, the peace that Jesus comes to give, which again is unlike anything our world had ever seen or has ever seen since, because it truly is for all people. to come and stand under it. Now, in that day, did you notice that he says the root of Jesse? How can this person that's going to come be both a shoot that comes up out of a stump, but also be something much deeper underneath and a root for that tree, the root of Jesse? So it's both the root of Jesse and the shoot of Jesse. If I haven't lost you, and that's not too complicated, I just want to summarize it by saying it's possible, because all of this, what we're standing in today, what we're hoping on, it is a great book that's beautifully written, but they're not just stories. All of this is authored and backed up by God himself. Because this future ruler that was going to come, it wasn't just going to be someone who was born because of great genetics, and that's how they were going to rule and sort out the world. It was someone who the very Spirit of God was going to rest in them. And that wasn't going to happen through, quite often my daughter's obsessed with the Tudors, so she's always telling me about the intermarriage that took place in the early modern period, and how dynasties would try and ensure survival by marrying off with other powerful European families. It wasn't through any of that. Nobody would have chosen Mary, if that was the case, to be the mother of this important baby. It's because God is at the root of all of this and has been all along. He was the one who made promises to David that he would have a descendant on the throne forever. He was the one who, even through the ebbing and flowing of Israel and their fortunes and their country really going to the dogs at this point, he's keeping something alive. Even through a line of peasants, he's keeping a genealogy going, and eventually he's going to fulfill his promise to bring a saviour from that line. He is at the root of all of this. So it's not really about humans. It's about God working through all of that. He's actually going to be fully God, as Jesus is, but he's also going to be a man from this genealogy, and he's going to bring peace. I love the word for peace in the Old Testament. It's shalom. And you've probably heard the word shalom. Shalom, my friend. It was kind of an assembly tune when I was a kid. But it means so much more than peace. It means intactness, being put together again. And I just want to end on this, that what we celebrate, the reason Advent is a cause for such joy, is because we worship a God who saw our brokenness and said, I'm going to put them together again. And the hope of Christianity that you and I take part in is we are people who are being put together again. We're being put at peace with God. We're being put at peace with each other, which is what we do at communion. We share that peace. We're being put at peace with ourselves, because a lot of us have a pretty loud inner critic. A lot of us have noisy brains. A lot of us have a sense of being fragmented, and there's different versions of us. And Jesus comes to put all that together, to bring shalom, peace, wholeness, intactness. Do you know that promise for yourself this morning? And do you know that peace? Because if you don't, you're invited to it. That's what the gospel is all about. It's Jesus saying, you know what, that table is not full. There's space for you, and you're invited to it, to that peace that he gives. May God bless his word to us this morning. Amen.